Hello, everyone. My name is Pradeep Nayak, and I'm going to be facilitating and hosting this webinar today. And I'm at the University of Waterloo. I also represent here the B2B Global Partnership on Small-Scale Fisheries. What a pleasure to join all of you today with our speaker. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, because we know people are joining from all parts of the world. So I will start a few rounds of introduction before we get to the talk today. So that introduction will include a bit about the B2B Global Partnership. I'll also briefly mention about the thematic webinar series, and then I will introduce our speaker today before we get to the talk. So just as an introduction to the B2B Global Partnership, which is a transdisciplinary research, knowledge, and action network with over 100 members from Asia, Africa, Canada, and internationally. The goal of this global partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And the way we have been focusing on vulnerability and viability is not just in an economic sense, but also to include all aspects of human lives. That goes into political, the cultural, the ecological, environmental, and other dimensions that human life always gets entangled with, and and necessarily the small-scale fisheries life itself. Our focus is fourfold. The focus here in terms of our network is to co-create and co-produce the knowledge that is essential for engaging in this transition to viability. Also creating multiple different types of repositories which can hold this co-created knowledge, as information systems that can be used by not only the community members, but also the policymakers and researchers and other actors. Developing multifaceted capacity, again, not only early career researchers or practitioners, but also policymakers and senior researchers as well. So we also aim to synthesize and integrate the knowledge in a way that is helpful for governance of small-scale fisheries at multiple scales. In a big way, we are also engaged in knowledge mobilization because of the availability of the co-produced knowledge itself. The B2B Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fisher communities and other key civil society, NGO, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. We are conducting transdisciplinary, community-engaged, policy-driven research in 6 countries of Asia. That includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa. That includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. In doing so, the B2B Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. The B2B thematic webinar series, for which we have virtually gathered here today, is an initiative of the B2B Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries or related to it. The goal is to feature academics, government representatives, practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. And we'll get a glimpse of that today in the talk. B2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month, and it will continue to be so during the whole year of 2025. So please join us in the next months as well. The series is available internationally through live streaming on YouTube. Details regarding the monthly webinars, including speakers, topics, and titles, and links to webinar platforms is available in our website, which is www.b2bglobalpartnership.org. Today's webinar is the first, which is our inaugural webinar talk in the series of B2B thematic webinars planned for the year 2025, and the 49th since January 2021 when it all started. So we have been continuing non-stop since 2021. And it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Svein Jentoft as our distinguished speaker today. Dr. Svein Jentoft is a Professor Emeritus at the Norwegian College of Fisheries Science, UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. His long career as a social science scientist, specializing on fisheries management and fisheries communities, has yielded more than 30 books and numerous other peer-reviewed articles. That doesn't include, of course, the more practice and policy-oriented contributions that Dr. Jentoft has made. His latest book, if you are interested, is titled as Implementing the Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines, a Legal and Policy Scan, which is co-edited with Dr. Julia Nakamura and Dr. Ratana Chuenpagdee, and which is published by Springer. The range of topics covered through his scholarly work is extraordinary. Just to mention a few: fisheries, aquaculture, coastal, marine, inland, freshwater, policy, contributions that focus on policy, place, and people with specific attention to indigenous peoples, just to name a few, but numerous more that delves into the areas such as interactive governance, co-management, justice, power, poverty, transdisciplinarity, which you will hear again, and the list can go on and on and on in terms of the contributions to the scholarships and practice around small-scale fisheries and coastal and marine governance. Dr. Jentoft also has a long time interest in the conditions of indigenous peoples in Nicaragua and his native country, which is Norway. He has led and been involved in many international projects, working in the Global South, as well as in the Global North. His role in the small-scale fisheries guidelines and its development and the implementation process until now has been significant. And those of us who know his work in that sphere, we know that it is groundbreaking and it has made tremendous contributions to how the guidelines have helped small-scale fisheries to progress and develop in certain directions. He is a founding member of TBTI, Too Big to Ignore, and is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Maritime Studies. And I'm also very proud to say that Dr. Jentoft is also a key member of the B2B Global Partnership as an international collaborator, and he co-leads the B2B Working Group on Transdisciplinary Capacity Development. Something that we have learned from Dr. Jentoft's work, I'll just mention that here. In some of the previous writings of his own, he has argued that viable fishing communities require viable fishing stocks, and viable fish stocks require viable fishing communities. And we have taken great lessons for the work that we do in B2B Global Partnership from these descriptions in his earlier work. So that has helped us to kind of look at how rebuilding and maintaining viable fishing communities and fish stocks cannot succeed without first dealing with the vulnerabilities. And that's what we are engaged, learning from and being inspired by his work. The idea that healthy fishing communities and healthy fish stocks require one another implies a viable system that contains both a social ecological integrated perspective that we also use in our work. So it is my honor today to invite Dr. Svein Jentoft to deliver today's inaugural talk for the B2B Thematic Webinar Series 2025. And as you all already know, the talk is titled as What is Transdisciplinary? Think ZAS. Thank you very much once again, Svein, and the floor is yours, and we're eager to listen to your talk.
I hope this, you can see this.
We can see.
Well, before I begin, I must thank Prateep for this nice and extensive introduction. But I also thanking for the opportunity to speak here today, and I consider it as an honor to have this, to be given this opportunity, and I will try to live up to his introduction, although I cannot promise anything, but I will do my best. The topic that I will discuss is here, and what I will talk about and then is actually the same topic that I talked about last time I talked to the V2V community in Puri in India in 2023, which was also about transdisciplinarity. There were some issues that was left in the air when I finished, largely because the interesting discussion we had then between me as the speaker and people in the audience. And that conversation has stayed with me since and inspired this talk. So this is a direct follow-up of the conversation we had then. I will show you a few slides, quite a few of them, but they will not contain a lot of text. They are basically images, photos, etc. So I'm afraid that this presentation is more for the ear than for the eyes. But I think that is perhaps even better, because I always find it difficult to listen and read at the same time. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm given 45 minutes, and I will try my best to stay within that limit, of course. In Puri, I mentioned this guy, Richard Sennett, who is a famous sociologist, and is also remarkable in the way he often uses music to illustrate his points, his arguments about society. He is like he does in this book, but also in other books. In addition to being a renowned theorist, he's also used to be a professional cellist and a conductor of classical music. When I talked about him, a person in the audience commented that transdisciplinarity then perhaps can be compared to country music, which I didn't agree with, but I didn't have a good alternative. And that is what I have been thinking about since then. And I arrived at the conclusion that jazz is a better metaphor for transdisciplinarity. So before I explain why this is the case, let me talk a little bit about what is a metaphor. And I'm sure you know it already. You know, we often use them to explain something that is complex and difficult by something that is simple and easy to grasp. When we, for example, say that life is like a roller coaster. Of course, life is not a roller coaster, but it can be seen as a roller coaster in the sense that it goes up and down. It's not a linear thing. Another famous metaphor is the one of William Shakespeare. I assume that Shakespeare is not the standard reference in when you give fisheries talks, but he said, "All the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." So he compares our life in the world as being on a stage, like being in a theater. So I must ask you, therefore, to bear with me when I talk about jazz as a metaphor. The whole point is not to talk about jazz, to explain you what jazz is, but to use jazz to explain what is transdisciplinarity. Jazz is just a metaphor. Shakespeare actually inspired the dramaturgical sociology of Irving Goffman. He has been described as the most influential thinker in American social science in the second half of the 20th century. And he is very famous for this book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And here is a picture of Irving Goffman, who didn't reach old age. But here is a picture of him. Choose your self-presentation carefully, because what starts as a mask may become your face. How about that? Anyway, what he does is that he uses also the language of the theater when he analyzes human interaction. This has now become part of our everyday language. I give you a performance here. I follow a script for how to act in the role as speaker. And you out there, and I hope you're out there, are the audience. You know, this is a lot of metaphor from the theater in what I just said. And this is how we speak these days. In the age of globalization, the world has indeed become a stage, as Shakespeare said. In our situation, we are talking about a virtual one. Metaphors are ingrained in our everyday language. We actually live by them, says George Lakoff and Mark Johnson in a book that came out in 1980 and is often referred to. The metaphor is pervasive in everyday life, not just in language, but in thought and action. We academics use them all the time when we argue. They also help us to understand things, and which is perhaps even more important because it's more consequential. We use them when we govern. He says, that is Jan Koyman in his book, Governing as Governance. He actually says the same thing. You know, he says that governance is unimaginable without images or metaphors, if you like. So we govern by means of metaphors. The word governance is also, in fact, a metaphor. It's a word, old Greek word, for how to steer a boat. Jan Koyman talked about the most famous metaphor we use in fisheries governance, which is the tragedy of the commons of Garrett Hardin. And I assume you know that article by Hardin very well. I remember Prateep called his paper "A Rabbit Model is a rabbit model of governance possible?" He had noticed something interesting with the rabbits he keeps in his backyard and thought, you know, gee, they tell us something. So once you start looking for metaphors in speeches and literature, you find them everywhere. We think about them and we act on them. People often wonder what's the difference between multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. It's not that easy to explain because they overlap. Multidisciplinarity is included in interdisciplinarity, and interdisciplinarity is included in transdisciplinarity, as shown in a Venn diagram. I think I show that in Puri as well. They are overlapping, but that doesn't say much. I have struggled to find a good way of explaining to others and to myself. I must add what the difference is. Some years ago, in a TBTI course in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, the topic for my talk was also transdisciplinarity, and I struggled with how to actually explain it to people. And then I showed them a photo of the hotel where we were staying. I got this idea almost on the spot. I asked them to think about the hotel as sort of, that's where we find the problem that we are supposed to solve. And then think of people from different disciplines moving into the hotel and occupying different rooms, and then meeting each other only for breakfast. Well, that is multidisciplinarity, I argued. Then think of interdisciplinarity in this way. People occupy different rooms, but they have connecting doors, and they walk in and out of of each other's rooms when they need to talk to each other if they cannot wait for breakfast. So what then is transdisciplinarity? And I said, imagine everyone in the hotel of these different scientists of different disciplines moving into the same room. That's where they stay. They own the problem together, and together they must take responsibility for the situation and find a solution. That is transdisciplinarity, I argued. A caveat is in order. Metaphors are just mental constructions, images in our mind. They are nevertheless knowledge. Aristotle argued that they are a weaker form of knowledge than empirical knowledge. Gregory Bateson reminded us that images like metaphors should not replace the real thing. He's famous for saying, the map is not the territory. The name is, and he was not just speaking to geographers. Map is his own metaphor. He also said, the name is not the thing being named. Herein lies the danger of governing by metaphors, as Elinor Ostrom warned against, and she was thinking about the tragedy of the commons. Metaphors are no alternative for the real thing that we can grasp through empirical knowledge, just a beginning of the learning process. They can both be a distraction and a fallacy. They can lead us astray, which was also Aristotle's point. In other words, a hotel is not the only place where transdisciplinarity can work. So forget about the hotel. The hotel is just an image of the structural organization of transdisciplinarity. As the tragedy of the commons, the image of the hotel has limitations. It makes it look simpler than it is. The hotel metaphor says nothing about the process of transdisciplinarity, nothing about who are in the room, and nothing about what goes on there. I explain, I therefore argue that to understand the process of transdisciplinarity, we need a different metaphor. And that is where I think jazz may serve a purpose. I will now show you a video clip of Oscar Peterson and his band. And I want you to both listen to their music, but also to watch them playing. It's a video of Oscar Peterson, Barney Kessel, and Nils Henning Ørsted Pedersen. And if I can get some help, we will play a little bit of them. Well, if I were you, I would rather listen to Oscar Peterson than to me. So, but had to break it there, and you can find it, lots of them on YouTube. Do you notice that they do not read from notes, and that there is no conductor who reads from a score? Together they improvise, and by that they are creating new music in real time. Amazing, wouldn't you say? I think so. And that's why I think jazz is interesting in itself. The band members are brilliant on their own instruments. They harmonize as they individualize when they play solo, after which they come together again as a band. They work as a team, but for that they must listen to each other and respond accordingly. They do not compete, they cooperate. They must know the other instrument as well as the person playing it. They must like and respect each other. Henning Ørsted Pedersen, who's a Danish guy, On the contrabass was Oscar Peterson, most faithful band member. They played together for a very long time, for more than a decade. It is delightful to hear and see them play together. They communicate, and for that, they must listen carefully and watch each other. When Peterson throws a glance at Pedersen or Barney Kessel on the guitarist, he signals that now it's your turn. Now we must hear from you. That is their social contrast, as it were. Without such a contract, the band would not work, and they would not co-create new music. Like Oscar Peterson, Yuya Wang, who is a classical pianist and a virtuoso, they are all unique in their own way. But when Yuya Wang plays Mozart or Rachmaninoff, she does not do it differently from, let's say, Arthur Rubinstein plays it, or from what any other classical pianist would do. In a long interview with composer and conductor Andre Previn, which is also on YouTube, Oscar Peterson makes the point of distinguishing himself from a classical pianist, like Yuya Wang and Arthur Rubinstein. They play each note as the composer wrote them, like the symphony orchestra also does. They interpret the music, and their interpretation is largely the same every time. Not so with Oscar Peterson. Unlike another great jazz pianist, Errol Garner, he could read sheet music. Still, he deviates from the scripted notes. He improvises. He plays the same tune differently, at least a bit differently each time. He does not interpret the music. Oscar Peterson plays the music in a sense that a footballer plays or a child plays, just as the child plays with the toy or the footballer plays with the ball. Peterson plays with the music, with the melody, and he seems to have fun while doing it. I argue that transdisciplinarity is more about playing than interpretation. I'm sure Yuya Wang and Arthur Rubinstein have fun too, but they have a different kind of fun. You do not see them smile as they perform, like Peterson and his band members do to each other. Wang and Rubinstein reserve their smile until after they are done and receive the applause. I doubt that Rubinstein felt the child in him when he is interpreting Peter Tchaikovsky or Franz Liszt. Not sure what Peterson does when he plays Mac the Knife or Sweet Georgia Brown, but I believe that he have more fun. Transdisciplinarity in small-scale fisheries research is a challenging exercise, but who said it should not be fun? It could be argued that innovation and creativity require playfulness or foolishness, as the organization theorist James March argued in a famous article. To be foolish is to be curious, willing to experiment, take risks, be undisciplined, like children are before we take those things away from them. March says it's rational for organizations to be foolish. if they lose their foolishness, they are likely to lose in the marketplace. You could argue the same for science, especially the science that is innovative and curiosity-driven. Einstein said that if you know what you're doing, you are probably not doing science. Science is about innovation, but innovation cannot be predicted. If we could predict it, it would not be innovation. To create new knowledge, we should therefore be more focused on the process than the outcome. Then we might not just surprise others, but also surprise ourselves. That would be less likely if all your focus is on following rules and scripts. We learn more, I would argue, when we play than when we interpret. Like when we challenge our disciplinary assumptions and boundaries rather than when taking them for granted and follow them slavishly. Playfulness requires that you are freed from the discipline of the discipline. Talking about city planning, Richard Sennett, who I referred to earlier, draws a parallel to jazz. How about that? City planning and jazz. Jazz musicians follow rules, he says. Some things are given, like the written melody and the fundamental harmonies that are spelled out in the song they base their improvisation on. Here's a quotation. Good jazz improvisation follows rules of economy. Variations pick out an element to explore, otherwise they lose focus. The harmonic reversals are disciplined by what came before. Above all, the jazz musician has to select elements for his or her own instrument that someone playing a different instrument can respond to. A successful improvisation would avoid something like the equivalent of a visual maze, or maze is a labyrinth or something. Still, even if a jazz musician follows rules, he enjoys more freedom than a classical musician does not have. A classical musician asks himself or herself, how does the composer want me to interpret his music or his music? The answer is in the smallest detail in the sheet in front of her. A jazz musician, on the other hand, doesn't ask that question. He plays it as he chooses and makes the decision on the spot. That might be what Oscar Peterson has in mind with his composition called Hymn to Freedom. Who knows? He plays a tune, not a song, or perhaps a song without words, which is Lieder ohne Worte, which is the cryptic name of Mendelssohn's beautiful composition for piano. Maybe it doesn't make sense, words, a song without words. So you might have to consult Ludwig Wittgenstein to understand if it makes sense or not. He asks questions like, what is a word anyway? But Peterson may instead have been thinking of the human rights kind of freedom which the SSF Guidelines promotes, or the freedom Plato illustrated metaphorically with his allegory of the cave, which you see an image of here, where people are locked where they sit and can only see the images of the wall and take them for real. Or Peter Fonda's version of the same thing. The freedom that comes with education, knowledge, and enlightenment. I believe that one is only free when one is learning, and one can only learn when one is free. The freedom to play as you like is the difference between a jazz band, and a symphony orchestra. Gustavo Dudamel, the Venezuelan maestro, follows a score. And you can see him turning the page. Oscar Peterson does not have one. Here is Dudamel with Yuyavan. In a symphony orchestra, the composer has determined how the musicians shall play to harmonize, and they just need to follow what is on the sheet in front of them. There is no jam session in classical music as in jazz. In jam sessions, musicians start playing together without much preparation, other than agreeing on what tune to play. They just listen to each other and respond as they see fit. Peterson doesn't instruct Ørsted Peterson what to play. How could he? It's not his discipline. His discipline is playing the piano, not playing the bass, the bass. For that, he relies on Ørsted Peterson. Transdisciplinarity does not require that we play jazz in a band in a room which we inhabit together in a hotel, just that we pretend to. Imagine if natural and social fisheries scientists could work together like they do in a jazz band, or in a jazz session even. It isn't hard to do, as John Lennon said. Then we would think about the researchers as the musicians, and the instruments as the specific methodologies and concepts we play with. The music would then be the new knowledge that we co-create. Becoming a scientist is not that different from becoming a musician. You learn to play your instrument or your discipline from years of practice. Playing together in a jazz band, or in a symphony orchestra for that matter, requires a different kind of training. It's not enough to become skilled on your instrument. You must learn to play with others, because it is a social practice that requires relational skills. It is about sociology, if you like. The word trans means beyond, and transdisciplinarity is also beyond science. Transdisciplinarity involves knowledge from people who provide that beyond, because they know things not from academic education, but from practical experience. They know the context, which they have learned from engaging in it. And here is a definition that I don't think I will read. In transdisciplinarity, non-scientists like small-scale fisheries play a role by bringing their experience-based knowledge and wisdom into the process of knowledge creation. And they bring their morality into the process of acting on it. That is what Aristotle called phronesis, which is a knowledge form distinguished from science, which he called episteme, and which lives on in the word epistemology. It is also different from his techne concept, which is the knowledge of a craftsman, a bureaucrat, or an artist. And that is a word that still lives on in the word technology. When listening to Oscar Peterson and Yuya Wang, you are amazed by their technique, how they can move their fingers up and down the keyboard. I wrote a paper almost 20 years ago where I used this phonetic concept to argue for the role of that knowledge dimension as relevant in fisheries governance. And you may find it if you look it up. People who have experience-based knowledge, phonetic knowledge, ethical knowledge, can provide an important check on the excessive use of metaphors that scholars bring to the table. For instance, when they talk about the tragedy of the commons and believe that is all you need to know about the problem that fisheries management aims to solve. To again use Gregory Bateson, the name is not the thing being named. Jazz is not the music being played. It is just the name for it. The name is not the thing being named. Transdisciplinarity is not the research, it's just the name we attribute to the organization and process of knowledge co-creation that resembles the way jazz band plays. One more point, and I will be done with the jazz metaphor. When Yuya Wang performs, the audience sits still while listening in awe. And they wait with their applause until the end. In a jazz concert, on the other hand, there is typically applause after all solos. People are active, cheering. What is a jazz concert without an engaged audience? The latest jazz concert I was at, people were even dancing. That doesn't happen in classical music concerts. So the audience in jazz are part of the process of enabling the music in a way the audience in a classical concert is not. So what makes a jazz concert into a great experience is the interaction between the band and the audience. People in that audience share the freedom of the musicians. They are in the same hall or in the same room, as I made a point of earlier, and they do not have to sit still. They do not have to wait for the record to come out, or the research report, if you like. If there is a live recording, they are actually part of it. Thus, a jazz concert, like transdisciplinarity research, is a different form of interaction and therefore a different experience than a classical music concert because of the role the audience plays. Jazz music is not necessarily more beautiful than a classical concert, but I think it's more amusing, although I do take exceptions from an evening at the proms at the Royal Albert Hall, which looks like a lot of fun. And I also take exceptions from Oscar Peterson when he plays Hymn to Freedom. I get goosebumps every time I listen to it, and you can find it also on YouTube. In Puri, I talked about the SSF guidelines, which have things to say about what makes small-scale fisheries vulnerable and what they think would help to make them become viable. More research-based knowledge and transdisciplinary knowledge is certainly one of them. To use another metaphor, the SSF guidelines therefore extend a hand to the academic community, to us, to the V2V team. They welcome our contribution, but they do not specify how we should contribute and with what kind of knowledge. That they leave to us to figure out. But between the lines, there are hints. They do not mention the word transdisciplinarity, but they talk about holistic knowledge and local knowledge. We may well interpret that as a quest for transdisciplinarity. In other words, they want us to play jazz, I argue. But jazz is not easy to play. And as experienced when I was young and played in a band with some friends, and I gave it up. Transdisciplinarity is not easy either, for a number of reasons. Crossing disciplinary boundaries is complicated because of the knowledge and the language problem, and the basic assumptions and perspectives that underpin each discipline. They are not called disciplines for nothing. Disciplines are institutions, or can be seen as institutions, that exercise discipline on members by sanctioning those who deviate from the norm. Bringing phonetics, the phonetics of non-academic people, like fisheries people, into the equation makes sense, but it doesn't make it easier. On the contrary, it raises the question of how you actually do it. Transdisciplinarity is an inclusive, adaptive process of interactive learning. How can one learn from others who one does not really understand? For instance, because they use an incomprehensible language. Transdisciplinary research and communication as a form of social interaction requires an inclusive common language. But scientists tend to talk more than they listen, and they talk in the language that they have learned in their training. But they tend to insist that their language is the lingua franca. In Puri, I referred to Patrick Moynihan, a sociologist, a US senator, and an ambassador, who introduced the word semantic intervention, which occurs when you force another person to use your language. Semantic infiltration would run the transdisciplinarity into a dead end and turn it into a power game rather than a process of interactive learning, which is how it is supposed to work. Then, if you're there, you soon start looking for the door. I speak in metaphors, as you may have noticed. Richard Sennett is an admirer of this guy, Montaigne, who lived from 1533 to 1592. Montaigne was a mayor, an author, and a free thinker. He is the person who introduced the essay as a literary form. He is fun to read, and he has also inspired my work. He makes a point, Montaigne, about distinguishing between discussion and debate. Discussion is more of an equitable exchange of knowledge, views, perspectives, and experience. It gives the listener a chance to respond. And notice how much emphasis I put on how jazz works with regard to being able to respond what other players are doing. Debate, on the other hand, has a tendency to suppress the listener. The debater demands only assent, approval, and agreement. As Sennett puts it, Montaigne observes that the declaration of a speaker's superior knowledge and authority arouses doubt in a listener about his or her own powers of judgment. The evil of passive submission follows from feeling code. Whereas argumentation is about scoring points, winning a debate, persuading others that you are right and they are wrong. Discussion is, as Montaigne defines it, about learning. It is built from the ground up as a two-way process, notably not without challenge or contradiction. Montaigne quotes Cicero, who said that there can be no discussion without a challenge and contradiction. Sennett regards listening as a cooperation and through dialogue, and we could add transdisciplinarity to that. Even a poorly phrased argument that can convey an important message. You may miss the point if you do not pay attention to the subtext, what the speaker is trying but cannot say as eloquently as you can. Therefore, deep listening is equally important. In his essay on the art of discussion, Montaigne is again quoting Cicero. We must, and I quote, we must see not only what each one says, but also what he thinks, and also why he thinks it. I argue again that this is also a condition for the process of transdisciplinarity to run its course. Montaigne saw the natural science as above the arts. His observation is still relevant. Amazing. In the fisheries and marine realm, which is my concern here, academic disciplines form an informal, taken for granted hierarchy of prestige and recognition, with the hard sciences having the most elevated ranking. Cross-disciplinarity communication therefore often evolves as Montaigne described. He says, for each science has its presupposed principles by which the human judgment is circumscribed on all sides. If you happen to attack this barrier in which lies the principal error, they have this maxim in their mouth, that there is no arguing with people who denied first principles. This, again, is, in other words, the institution of the discipline as an institution, sanctioning deviant behavior, in other words, practicing discipline on members. So my last point is, questioning is recognizing that a speaker may have something worthwhile to say. We do not like to be lectured and detest patronizing smiles when we talk. But we love to be asked questions, not just for being given the opportunity to explain or position, but also for the dignity it bestows in us. Still, it matters how questions is raised. The question is raised from an arrogant or superior position, or from a modest, respectful position. Montaigne was in favor of the latter, while advancing the perspective of skepticism to dogmas. I'm looking forward to the Q&A section here. Okay. There is no doubt that, and just a few seconds, there is no doubt that that scientists are in for a wild ride when they practice cross-disciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. The more open the process, the less control they have. But control is the antithesis of creativity. So maybe that is the price they must be willing to pay. Transdisciplinarity is a challenge to the self-perceived superiority of scientists, but it is a healthy reality check also on the metaphors and models that scientists use. So in transdisciplinarity research, scientists are not in a sovereign position. The definition of the problem and the solutions prescribed is not theirs. That's something that emerges through a process of interaction. Where fishers have a right to be present. As stakeholders, people do have a right to be part of the process of decision-making that affects them. Plato's vision of the role of the philosopher kings, who rule by virtue of their superior expert knowledge, is not for a transdisciplinarity research and governance process to emulate. It is not a good idea. But Plato's idea is, of course, better than the word or the practice of called kakistocracy, from the Greek word kakistos, which is ruling by the worst kind of people, those that are least qualified and most unscrupulous among us. So it may ring a bell. Plato was not a democrat. He would not have supported transdisciplinarity. It's an open process, too little control, and scientists must yield some of their power. But Plato, he was a brilliant thinker. There's no question about that. But he may not have had the sense of humor that transdisciplinarity requires. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svein. I mean, metaphors are so powerful, in terms of, adding meaning to a whole set of things that are not generally understood the way the metaphors try to explain. And your use of Zaz as a metaphor to better understand and also practice transdisciplinarity in our, everyday work around small-scale fisheries is a wonderful, intervention there, I would say. Lots to learn, especially I love the idea about, how the real meaning is in playing rather than, doing other things. And it might attract a lot of people to kind of, come and play, in how they want to engage in transdisciplinarity rather than, doing other things. So there is a number of questions. I am afraid, there's not a lot of time, but we still have several minutes to take some questions. So I would straight jump into some of the questions. There are many messages for you where people are saying thank you for those wonderful ideas, around transdisciplinarity and Zaz. But I'm not going to read all of that. The first question is from Navya Nair, who is asking, as you mentioned about jazz musicians, they sometimes have creative conflicts that lead to better music. In your experience, how do different disciplines in fisheries research navigate conflicts and differences to create meaningful solutions?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is easy and that conflicts cannot occur in transdisciplinarity. Indeed, it is more likely that conflicts may occur in transdisciplinarity than in, for instance, in pure disciplinarity, because you have to engage with other people with different training, with different perspective, and different convictions. So conflict is the name of the game, so to speak. But transdisciplinarity is about sociology in a way. You need to find a way to actually deal with those conflicts. You have to be able to solve them in a civilized way that doesn't stop the process, and people look for the door, as I said. But this is what discussion means. People have to enter the process with a different mindset than the traditional superior perspective on your own knowledge relative to other people. So it also requires that kind of training. And that's what I illustrated with, it's not enough to learn to play an instrument. You need to know to play it together with others. And that's a relational kind of thing, a sociological kind of thing. And it's not a technical kind of thing. It is about phronesis more than techno or epistemic. Yeah. I hope that was
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much, Svein. And thanks for the question, Nabia. And then the second question is from Aliou Shal, from Aliou, of course, from Senegal. And Aliou is writing, you mentioned about switching to TD requires a certain risk culture, but don't you think that we need to decompartmentalize the so-called hard sciences from the so-called soft sciences? Given the conservatism in the way research is conceived and carried out, should not we intervene upstream to prepare the younger generation for the TD by integrating TD modules into academic institutions? It's a very complex question for you.
But I do think we have to keep the conversation of these issues going, and be aware of what the issues actually are. And that is also what I try to allude to by my reference to Montaigne, when he distinguishes between argumentation and discussion. In the former case, it's about winning a debate, saving the face of your disciplines. Whereas in the other thing, it is more, it's about discussion. It's about equal, kind of exchange of ideas, tapping into the knowledge, not just of scientists, but also the people for whom these things are real. They live with them, like small-scale fisheries. And I would hope that our teaching could sort of, the way we transmit these perspectives could seep into the way we teach and the way we raise students, and tell them that, let them understand that it's not just about learning to play your instrument, but it's also about learning to play together with others. You need to be a good musician or a disciplinary researcher, but you also need to understand what you can actually learn from interacting with others. Unfortunately, we tend to create a certain degree of arrogance among our students, which makes them believe that they do not have anything to learn from people from other disciplines and lay people that are out there. And that is an attitude that works against so many things that are also ethical and moral, not to speak of cognitive. And we have to convey that and keep a conversation about this alive, also within V2V.
Mhm. There are many more messages, Svein, about how people really liked and learned from your talk. There is a message from Amarjit. There is a message from okay, Bala. And Bala is asking, Bala is at the Thompson River University in Western Canada. And Bala is asking, ecosystems could itself be a metaphor. Ecosystems could be a metaphor in themselves, as many subparts come together to make the system function. How do we bring small scale fisheries into this jazz, which is perhaps is an elite evening with restricted access to the event. So it's bringing any equity into who gets to participate in a jazz, not as the person playing the jazz, but also being in the audience.
Mhm. Well, how do we actually do it? It's not easy to say, and we have to welcome it in the first place, and we have to realize that there is indeed something. There is a world out there that we can learn from. But we tend to take residence in our models and our metaphors, and not in the reality that people live in these communities and who experience the vulnerability that small-scale fishing. We have to be out there. We have to get our feet wet, and that should also be part of our education. System is, of course, also a metaphor, and if there is one lesson that I think we share, is that fisheries is a complex social and ecological system. It hangs together. People interact. They are dependent on each other. And if you want to make small-scale fisheries more viable, you cannot just address people or communities individually. You have to see how they connect to their environment and to each other. And therefore, we have to think about, how do we organize things? How do we institutionalize things and stuff? And that is a perspective that I think also sociology brings to this discourse, but we shouldn't exaggerate it. Because if our focus is only on institutions and organizations, we tend to forget about the people.
Yeah. I would read a couple of questions, Svein, because we are almost at the time. But I will read a couple of them so that we don't lose them, those questions, and then I will let you respond to them, as a combined way. So one is from Amarjit, who is asking whether one plays one instrument or another, the performance put up is for the audience. What are certain things we can do at the structural level in academia to make transdisciplinarity easier or more accessible or more inclusive, as I would add? And then the second question is from Milena, and Milena is asking, can you comment on working transdisciplinarity in fishing communities that have been often victims of injustices? How do you level the playing field so that collaboration can unfold? So the same challenges of making it more inclusive. So I'll leave you with those two questions to quickly respond, Svein.
Well, how can we, you can argue for transdisciplinarity from a justice perspective. No question about that. It is actually about leveling the playing field, not just between the disciplines, but also between science on the one hand and the fishing community on the other hand. There is, of course, many ways of representing the voice of the community, and that needs careful consideration. That's about organization, and there's a lot about how do you make people speak with one voice in a way that doesn't
suppress some of these voices in a process that is democratic. This is a big issue, and it's not just in fisheries. How do you make people's voices count? That's an ambition that we should strive for also in science, because it's right. It's an ethical value. It's about social justice to begin. So, we need to continue to think about that. How do we actually do it? I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult from experience. The question is, how do you bring the social sciences on par with the natural sciences? How do you actually do that? The tendency is that we don't think about that. I'm just in a commission that looked at the Swedish eel fishery, an international panel consisting of 4 natural scientists and 1 token social scientist. It's difficult even for a experienced old social scientist like me to actually get this thing work, not to speak of the people themselves who were not part of that committee, but they were, of course, sounded out in the process, but not necessarily as it should be. You shouldn't think of small-scale fisheries people just as data.
Yeah.
The first question again, what was that about?
It was the first or the second one?
The first.
The first one is whether one plays one instrument or another, the performance put up is for the audience. What are certain things we can do at the structural level in academia to make transdisciplinary easier?
That is a very important question. In my college, Norwegian fisheries, the College of Fishery Scientists, it was established with the idea of doing something structurally and organizationally in order to bring about interdisciplinarity. The reality was, of course, that this was not easy, So we ended up, I think it's fair to say, that it's more about multidisciplinarity than interdisciplinarity. But the good thing is that we require that the students have some practical experience from fisheries. So they have that reality, they bring that reality and that knowledge and that experience into the process of education. And that made, the teaching of the professor not only challenging, but also extremely interesting. You learn as much as a teacher as I taught them. But this is what the hotel metaphor is all about. It's about structuring transdisciplinarity. How do you organize those interactions that transdisciplinarity requires? But I talk much more about the process of transdisciplinarity now than I did before.
Yeah, and that is so important. I just want to put on the table just a question from my end. If you want to respond to that, as we inching towards ending it. We heard a lot about how a jazz approach to transdisciplinarity includes learning by doing, improvisation, on the feet thinking, on the spot decisions. We have also known that transdisciplinarity is going within around and beyond certain disciplines. The critical question is how do we prepare ourselves, especially the early career and the younger scholars, to engage in this kind of a massive but also complex process. What can prepare them well for participating in this judge process of transdisciplinarity?
Mm-hmm. Well, disciplinarity is all about rules. Transdisciplinarity is about transgressing boundaries, about breaking down rules, have a more flexible attitude to reality, which requires that we think outside the box. Disciplines are boxes. And if we insist on the perspectives, language, superiority of disciplines, we will not manage to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we break that? Well, institutions like universities are difficult to change. Someone said about institutions that about universities that they are like cemeteries. You do not get any help of reorganization them from the people who is there. So it needs some initiatives to reorganize the way we teach. But I must also say, and that's a question to you, isn't this what V2V is about? Isn't it about to bring people out in the community, people from different parts of the world, different experience, different knowledges, different disciplines, different kinds of education, and the proof of the merit of the of transdisciplinarity is in the pudding. I would argue. You learn from actually meeting and working with people. The most important school I ever went to was a project I was involved in more than 20 years ago, where we were a group of people from different disciplines, and we were trying to write a book together. People from different parts of the world, and we traveled, etc., etc. That was perhaps not a course or a university in so much transdisciplinarity, but it was indeed interdisciplinarity, which is, I think, is a bit more easy than transdisciplinarity, and still we cannot do that.
It is so true. And in your talk, you actually mentioned about how we deal with these things within V2B, and within V2B we do ask people to contribute by being part of the platform, but also at the same time we do not specify what exactly to contribute. So that's the creativity part, that's the transdisciplinary part, as you already referred to. So I want to bring this to an end, and my apologies that we went over about 7-8 minutes today, but for a reason, for a cause. This is wonderful in terms of getting this idea about transdisciplinarity being a ZAS, and there are numerous ways that we can use this metaphor to not only learn but also to engage in how small-scale fisheries can move towards viability in their own context, but also beyond that within the scholarships that we are all part of. So thank you very much, Svein. But before you all go, I would like to request our team who is working on the background to please share the poster for the next month's important webinar that we are going to bring to you. It is going to be based on a new book from FAO that has just been published, which is titled as Governing for Transformation Towards Sustainable Small-Scale Fisheries. Again, a lot of contributions from various authors. This book is co-edited by Dr. Fikret Burkis and Nicole Frange from FAO. So we invite you to be part of that important webinar and the discussions next month on the last Friday, which is the 28th February at the same time. So you are all invited. So thank you once again to Svein and the audience. Amazing questions and your patience staying longer with us to participate in the discussions around small-scale fisheries vulnerability to viability. We look forward to seeing you next month on the 28th for yet another important and interesting talk by Fikret Burkis and Nicole Frange. Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Prateep, for giving me this opportunity. It is not the same as meeting people face to face as in Puri. Talking from my kitchen table is not the same kind of experience. It's not much transdisciplinarity there, but still, it is an opportunity to to address issues to an audience that is hopefully out there.
Yes, yeah. Talking from the kitchen table is part of the jazz, Svein. So we have to accept all bits and pieces, Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.